in Picher, Oklahoma, you can say, this is like heaven.
Anytime.
If you choose to say that.
That's right.
Or you can walk around and say, this is hell on earth.
Picher, Oklahoma is often called the most toxic city in America. Considered too toxic to be inhabited by the U.S. government, the former mining city today is but a mere ghost town, the population falling to zero in the 2020 census. Toxic lead and zinc contaminated the town and its surroundings, poisoning thousands of children over the course of several decades. Yet, it wasn't until the 21st century when the town was hit with one final blow too strong for it to withstand. A coup de grace in the form of an EF4 tornado that would destroy hundreds of homes and leave 6 dead. Looking around the town today, there isn't much left. Only the old shells of the homes and businesses thousands of people once called home. But the city wasn't always like this. In 1913, lead and zinc ore were discovered in far northeastern Oklahoma on land owned by Henry Crawfish, a few miles away from the Kansas border. Like most boomtowns, practically overnight a city was born, as thousands of people from across the region would flood into the area looking for jobs in the mines. By 1918, the town had been incorporated under the name of Picher, in honor of O.S. Picher, the former owner of the Picher Lead Company that owned the region's mines. In 1920, 9,726 people called Picher home, that number rising to its all-time peak of 14,252 just 6 years later in 1926. During this time, the town saw unprecedented prosperity as a result of the incredible productivity of its mines. As a part of the Tri-State Mining District, Picher and surrounding communities proved to be the largest producer of lead and zinc worldwide in the early 20th century. Picher alone producing nearly $20 billion in ore between 1917 and 1947. Over half of all lead and zinc used during the Second World War came from the Picher mines, the ore used primarily in the bullets and machinery the Allies used in combat against enemy forces. Times were good in Picher. The mining jobs paid fairly well, and the town was prospering well into the 1940s. But nothing good lasts forever, especially in the mining industry. The finite amounts of zinc and lead soon became depleted, leading to a gradual decline in mine productivity into the 1950s that led to a loss of business and people. Mining officially ceased in Picher in 1967. By then, only a little over 2,000 people called the town home. Although times were rough, unbeknownst to those residing in this little Oklahoma town, they were about to get a lot worse. The decades of unrestricted mining in Picher had produced 70 million tons of mine waste, known as chat, that was piled up into large hills or piles that surrounded the town on all sides. For decades, the townspeople had no idea the danger this waste posed to the health of them and their families. The piles lay just mere feet away from people's homes in some parts of town, and the city's children would often play carefree on the hills, sledding down them during the winter and utilizing the chat grains in their sandboxes. Though they didn't know it, the chat piles these children were in constant contact with contained high levels of heavy metals such as cadmium, a human carcinogen, and the poisonous lead and zinc produced in the mines below. The chat piles weren't the only places the people of Picher came in contact with these substances, though. In 1967, when mining operations in the town ceased, so too did the pumping within the mines that prevented them from filling with water. Within years, the mines were inundated, and without anywhere to go, the water within them began to seep into the surrounding ground, eventually contaminating the Tar Creek, which ran right through the heart of Picher. Several poisonous and carcinogenic substances would run freely through the river, turning it a reddish-orange and killing off most of the fish living within it. Though the change in color was noticed, it didn't stop the children of Picher from playing in its waters. It wouldn't take long for people to begin to realize that something was wrong in this little mining town. The EPA and federal government would quickly take notice of the environmental hazards facing the city, and in 1983 declared Picher and surrounding areas a Superfund site, a designation given to only the most contaminated sites in the country. With this newfound acknowledgement of the environmental disaster taking place in the town, the state would begin to cooperate with local officials to further investigate and mitigate the crisis. Despite the Superfund designation and the information regarding the hazards posed by their surroundings, people still remained in Picher, continuing to be exposed to the toxic substances in their air and water. In 1994, furthering confirmation of the scale of contamination in the community arrived in the form of a study conducted by the Indian Health Service. This study found that 35% of children in Picher had poisonous levels of lead in their blood. That same year, the EPA began conducting studies of ground soil in areas highly frequented by children, such as schoolyards, playgrounds, and daycares, and found significant traces of cadmium and lead within them, just as the government had suspected when the area was designated a Superfund site 10 years prior. But the damage was already done. The children tested in that 1994 study were just the tip of the iceberg. Thousands of children before them had been exposed to these same substances, constantly in contact with carcinogenic chemicals and poisonous materials, leading to extensive health issues ranging from learning disabilities to cancer. The EPA and locals made efforts to try to clean up their town, but in 2006 the EPA had seen enough. The town was simply too toxic for inhabitation. The first evacuations of city residents occurred later that year, but many were reluctant to leave, choosing instead to remain in the town they so loved as it slowly faded into a toxic cloud of dust. However, Mother Nature had different plans. Those who chose to stay would be hit with one last gut punch, the town's final nail in the coffin.
Oh my gosh. There's a tornado right there.
Where at?
Right there. You look at that, and then you get in that bathroom. See it? It is right there on the ground. You see it?
Yeah.
It is right there. It's on the ground. It's just a little bit to the south of us, about 400 yards. Oh my God.
On May 10, 2008, the Storm Prediction Center had issued a slight risk for much of northeastern Oklahoma. The primary risk area that day was supposed to be further to the southeast across Dixie Alley. But, despite the forecast, several supercells would blossom across Oklahoma. One in particular would quickly establish itself as the dominant storm in the region as it approached Ottawa County, the county within which the town of Picher lies. In the late afternoon, storm spotters would report that a tornado had touched down just south of the Oklahoma-Kansas border, near the city of Chitopa, and was moving rapidly eastward. Within minutes, people in the town of Picher would set eyes on the twister as it raced directly for them. Those in the town were no strangers to twisters. After all, Picher was located in the heart of Tornado Alley. But all tornadoes prior to this one had lifted before entering town. Many of the townspeople hoped and prayed that the same would happen again. But, to their horror, the twister would rage on. As it crossed over the chap piles surrounding Picher, the 1,000 or so residents still remaining in the city raced to shelter, just as the tornado barreled into town. 20 blocks within the city would suffer widespread damage, dozens of homes being destroyed in a matter of seconds. Some homes would be completely swept away, leaving only bare foundations in the storm's wake. Chat would coat the ground, along with the debris that once made up the city's buildings. 6 individuals lost their lives as a result of the tornado in Picher, and over 150 suffered varying degrees of injuries. The tornado would go on to terrorize other mining communities in southwestern Missouri, tearing through Newton and Berry counties where 15 more people would lose their lives before finally lifting. It was the deadliest twister in Oklahoma since the 1999 Mora 5. After the tornado, U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff would tour the damage path, describing what he saw by saying it looked like a small nuclear bomb went off. And indeed, after the tornado, Picher looked like a war zone. What buildings still stood were old and rickety. The old downtown area that was once described by locals as like a little Las Vegas had been diminished to a rusty carcass of what once was. The tornado was Picher's coup de grace, a culmination of years of suffering, one final blow before the town ceased to exist. Just 1 year later, the state of Oklahoma voted in favor of disincorporating the city of Picher. In the eyes of the government, Picher no longer existed. Shortly thereafter, the government would drastically ramp up their efforts to get people out of town, handing out federal checks to those who stayed after the tornado to give them the means to move out permanently. That same year, the Picher-Cardin School District closed its doors. All residents of the city gathered in downtown one last time. As everyone huddled around a bonfire, the toxic chat piles visible in the distance, a constant reminder of what had robbed them of their home, and tornado damage still visible, they'd sing their school fight song, reminiscing together about Friday Night Lights, their 1984 state football championship, and happier times. As the last embers of fire flew around the charred wood at the center of the mall, so too did the last flashes of life left in Little Picher, Oklahoma. Less than a year later, the census found that only 20 people remained in town, a decline of nearly 99% from 2000. The town's last resident was Gary Linderman, the owner of the town's final business, the All Miners Pharmacy. Gary loved Picher more than anything. He swore to stay as long as people needed him and planned on being the last person left in town. He once told a reporter that someday, some way, Picher would see a resurgence. That these final days of the historic Oklahoma mining town weren't truly the end. That it would come back better than ever sometime in the future. He died on June 9th, 2015. He was 60 years old. His death brought the population to 0, officially making it a ghost town. Most buildings in Picher have been demolished. Only a few homes, businesses, and the old high school are left. What's left of the town is today at risk of caving in. The hollow, aging mine shafts below are growing increasingly unstable, threatening to open up into large sinkholes, consuming the last remaining pieces of this once great city. All that remains of Picher are the memories of those who once called it home. Memories that are being passed on to their children who, despite being forced to move out of their homes, will now live a life free of the poisonous and cancer-causing substances their parents unknowingly grew up with. Every Christmas, the former town's people return to Picher, parading down the empty streets with marching bands, floats, and, most importantly, people. Though the town itself is gone, the spirit of the people certainly isn't. The statue of the former Picher-Cardin High School mascot, the gorilla, remains in the town, a symbol of the community's strength even in the face of the unconquerable. The former All Miners Pharmacy that Gary Linderman had owned and operated for so many years has been renamed the Gary Building, and now serves as a sort of community center honoring the town's last resident, his memory living on along with the town he dedicated his life to. Perhaps his dream of a resurgent Picher has come true in a way. Sure, the town itself is gone, but its spirit is as strong as ever, united as one to remember the town they so loved and to recall the glory days of Picher, Oklahoma that they all know they can never truly go back to. While most of our videos cover rather tragic subjects, I've never found myself growing as emotional as I have while researching the story and people of Picher. I can relate to them. Coming from a small town with a history of mining, I see myself in them. While listening to countless interviews given by former residents, I hear them talk of packed football games, tales of family members, and glory days long lost to time. And I can't help but think that a disaster like this could so easily happen to me, to anyone. While I certainly have no place inserting myself into their story, I think something we can all take away from the Picher tragedy is just how lucky most of us are to have cities, towns, and homes free of hazard that we can come back to every night, without the fear that everything we have ever known will be taken away from us in the blink of an eye, erased from the map and left to rot, fading away into oblivion. What makes the disaster even more tragic is that the people of Picher didn't even do anything wrong. It was the actions of years of irresponsible, unrestricted mining operations and government neglect that led to their home becoming the most toxic place in America. By the time they knew of the danger posed by their surroundings, it was too late. The damage had already been done. The EPA has been hard at work trying to clean up the area in the years since Picher's evacuation and eventual demolition, but the work is still far from being finished. The chat piles still remain, and the Tar Creek still runs red. In fact, the Tar Creek still poses a significant threat to local health even beyond Picher. The creek eventually runs into the Neosho River, which in turn eventually flows into Grand Lake, the primary source for drinking water and one of the largest centers of recreation in northeast Oklahoma. While local officials continue to work hard on fixing the issue, it'll still be years before Tar Creek and Picher are safe again. For now, there's still work to be done, at the site of what is arguably the worst environmental disaster in U.S. history.